So in 2001 was my first contact ever with Child Protective Services in the state of Washington. I willingly gave them my 1.5-year-old after I was placed under arrest by the city of Tacoma, and I went to do my time, and I did not have any contact with my daughter the entire time I was in prison. This kind of traumatized me, I guess. This is my first experience even having a child, and to be separated from her and not be able to see her for that long. I didn't understand why or what was going on, and it just made me so angry and so upset that I'll just never forget how traumatizing it was for me. Um, I also gave my son up for adoption at birth because I was pregnant when I went into jail. So I gave birth from uh, the hospital, but I was in my Pierce County Jail uniform and I was handcuffed to the bed. Basically, there was one cop on each side of my bed when I gave birth. He was perfectly healthy and I gave him up for adoption. That was August 25th, 2001. And after that, I went to jail or prison and I did my time. And then I got out and was pregnant again with my third child. And I gave birth to him November 30th, 2002. He was perfectly healthy. And I was living in a homeless shelter at the time. But when I moved out of the homeless shelter and into a hotel, they said that I wasn't allowed to do that. So they, CPS did, because I had an open case plan with my daughter who was still in a foster home from when I went to prison. So they wanted to place my son with her. And they did that by pretty much manipulating me into believing that I violated the case plan, that I guess I signed the court order, which I should have never done. And I voluntarily gave him to them because I believed at the time that they would kick the door down if I didn't. And that's not true, but basically I gave them custody of him when he was 3 months old, and I didn't get him back until he was 2, and my daughter was 4. So by the time I regained custody, I was moving back to Tacoma, and I did everything right the entire time that I had that open case, but it still took a very long time for it to close. And I always wondered why it was taking so long, and the judge would just keep continuing it, and I would find out later that they were, obviously using the wrong laws, and there was no reunification statute, so that's a key reason why my children didn't come home, because there's no law that says that they have to come home. And I didn't know at the time anything about the law. I didn't read the law. I was too traumatized, and I believed that lawyers weren't allowed to lie. I believed that, they wouldn't commit such a crime like that. A lawyer wouldn't do that. That's what I believed. I don't know why. I was naive and young, and I didn't read the laws myself because I wouldn't be able to understand them even if I did, just because of how young and clueless I was as far as the law goes. I wish I would have, but no, I never did. I barely read the court documents. That was traumatizing enough to read. So after that, I went to college, graduated college, and got a job at the hospital. I was about 23 years old, and I we were living in Tacoma. We were doing fine. I was just like a single parent with 2 kids, and they were in school, and I was working. And then I lost my job at about 2008 or 9. No, 8 is when CPS started coming back into my life. And it started with a phone call from the school that my son was attending, and they reported to CPS that he had missed 1 day of school, which consisted of, I think, about 3 hours at the time. So that was the first jump start, and from there, they continued to harass my children, and they interviewed them one time at the school. They couldn't get any information from them because they were too young. They didn't understand what these people wanted from them. They didn't know what drugs were, so when they were questioned about it, they had no idea what to say because, they didn't know what these people were talking about. And it didn't stop them from continuing. So basically, they kept questioning them here and there. I saw the discovery. Pretty much they did it behind my back. They came to my door, but I never answered to them because I don't have to. And because they were so mad I wouldn't answer the door, they just kept questioning my kids, off and on throughout those few months before 2009. October is when my son was attacked by a dog, and his dad went to prison when he was born for a 7-year sentence. So he had just been released from that sentence and was upset because I basically just wouldn't welcome him into my life again, And so he took that and called CPS basically because he claimed that I wasn't letting him see his son, which was not true. And other outrageous claims that didn't matter because it was all hearsay and from an anonymous person because they didn't know if he was his father or not. At that point, they had no clue who he was. But they took what he said and started an investigation and started coming into my door, knocking at my door all the time about, what I was doing in my personal life. My son was attacked by a dog and he got 40 something stitches on his right cheek, and he was 6 years old. So it was pretty impactful what happened to him, and we were all, traumatized by it. But his father took that injury and claimed that I was irresponsible when I placed him where I placed him for a babysitter, that it was my fault that, the dog attacked him and blah, blah, blah. And Jia McCrae took that and created this allegation of failure to protect my son from a dog. Okay, even though an accidental injury is never supposed to be considered child abuse because it's accidental, and a dog can only be an accidental injury unless I made the dog go after him, for which I would be charged. So yes, it has to be accidental because the police didn't arrest me, so that means it's accidental because I'm not a dog. So and I don't control that dog. It's not my dog, and if she had anything like real allegations, I would be in jail, and then that would be a real allegation. Otherwise, her failure to protect allegation was clearly inadmissible, and to me, it was criminal. But at the time, I didn't know what they could or could not do. I was young still. I didn't, understand why they kept coming to my door and harassing me when there was drunk people at the bar every day they could go harass. I didn't quite get that. But they did, and it continued on. And so basically on October 1st, 2009, after they questioned my children, they removed them from my custody without my knowledge or without anything, without a warrant, without a law, without anything. And because the law says the child has to be abandoned, they did not follow the law. They just took both of my children that were not abandoned and placed them in a foster home. And they did this in a violent way. They dragged him out the school hand over mouth, and basically they were traumatized by these events. My children were, and my son and daughter were placed in a foster home for 2 years. And everything I did, it didn't matter. I did everything right. It didn't matter what I did because they kept saying that I wasn't doing it right, or I wasn't doing it good enough, or I didn't do something else. It was always another story when I went to court. But as far as their father went, everything was okay with him. He was allowed to have custody, and he didn't do anything. And not only that, but he never even provided a clean drug screen or anything that he was supposed to do. But I guess that's the non-offending parent. But regardless, my children weren't abandoned. And I didn't know the laws at the time. I hadn't read them at all. So I didn't understand that they were misapplying the law. I just thought that my lawyer wasn't allowed to lie to me or tell me anything, fraudulent. But that's all she did. My lawyer at the time was Doris Watkins, and she was, oh my goodness. She told me that if I didn't sign the court orders that I would have my rights terminated, when in fact it's the other way around. It's when you do sign that you have your rights terminated. So I never knew that back then, so I basically was played right out of my kids. And Doris Watkins is now a judge, and I don't know how that happened, but she definitely is not who people think she is. And, they get cool points for doing what they do, but I'm sorry. She's fooling a lot of people in the public, and I don't know how she got that far, but she definitely doesn't deserve to be. Well, actually, you know what? She probably does deserve to be a judge, because judges in my eyes aren't that cool anyway, so maybe she does belong there. I don't know. They're not that cool to me. So it went from a dog bite, which was the original allegation, to me going to drug treatment, which had nothing to do with the dog bite, technically. And even, despite them using no laws at all, that was something that they weren't supposed to do, was, force a parent into treatment. There's no law that says that they can do that. But at the time, like I said, I didn't know, so I went through the motions, and I thought that I wasn't doing good enough. And I thought for a very long time, up until recently, that it was me, that I was the one that was the problem, that I wasn't doing it right, blah, blah, blah. But really, they can't take anybody's kids, even no matter how bad the abuse is. The child has to be abandoned no matter what. So that's the core issue here, is that they never applied the laws right from day one. And I went through 25 years of injustice, basically, because they were never supposed to do any of it. And my son suffered immensely because he went through foster care where he was severely abused, and that abuse stuck with him for a very long time. The first 2 years they were in foster care, my son was abused by an older boy that was living in the home. And it stuck with him for his entire life until he passed away at the age of 21 from fentanyl. And I know where his depression came from. He told me where it came from. And he also told me he was suicidal. I did not think that would take his life. I didn't understand how strong fentanyl was because I didn't do it. So I didn't know that it was that, detrimental. I had no clue. I knew it was bad. I just didn't know it was that bad. And I always thought he was young and he was strong and he'd be able to, overcome it at some point, but I didn't realize how, deadly it was until my son passed away from it. But it stemmed from his depression, and the reasons why he continued being on it was because of what happened to him in foster care. And months after that, what happened to him, how he was pretty much shuffled from place to place, and every 2 years my kids were moved to a different place. And my daughter was abused by many people during her stay in foster care, and nobody was brushing her hair. And Jamia did not care that was happening, and so her hair ended up falling out, and it ended up being like really short. And it was, I couldn't do anything about it but pretty much just sit back and visit my kids. That's all I was allowed to do. There wasn't much I could do if I was only seeing them every 2 weeks, and sometimes I wouldn't see them for months. So, when someone wasn't brushing her hair, it would be months before I see her again. There was nothing I could do, and it was all because Jamia made it that way. And she pretty much kept my kids away from me for that long. She was the social worker in my case for the entire 6 years, and she kept me away from my children completely for a long time. She did not let me have my children back at all. And I don't know why, but she did not like me. It was personal. And she would do everything in her power to make sure that their father got custody and not me. And then even when I told her that wasn't a good idea, she still did it anyway. And she knew that he was dangerous, and she knew that something would happen, and she did not care. And so in the end, when my children were hurt by it, basically, then she got mad because I said I would sue her, and she basically made sure that I never got custody of either of my oldest children at all, and forced them out of my life completely. And my daughter went to be adopted by complete strangers, despite me being in full compliance with the court order and doing everything right, and even parenting another child. It did not matter. It did not matter, because she was going to make sure that I never got my children back again. And that's what she did. It would take me many years to realize, but when I did start, working and doing what I was supposed to be doing to take care of my children, Jamia was the one who did take my job and also my health insurance. I didn't realize it back then, but many years later now, again, it's happening again. Every job I get is being taken from me. And I'm realizing now that that was probably exactly what happened in 2014, because right as the case was starting to, I thought, close, I lost my job. And they don't get any funding unless I'm not working. It was just the way that I lost my job that makes me believe that it was definitely intentional. And I didn't know where it was coming from, but I just knew that it happened. At the time, I didn't have a clue that it could have been CPS. I thought it was just chance. I didn't see the bigger picture. But yeah, definitely it was. And a lot of things that happened to me at that time that weren't good, I now question whether it was CPS that was doing it or had, you know, a part in making sure it happened. I don't know why she hated me so much, but I know that only she was benefiting from my suffering. Like there was nobody else that was working like with her or next to her that benefited from it. Like there was no reason for me to not have my kids. But she enjoyed making sure that I didn't. And that was just it's mind-boggling because I always thought it was somebody more powerful than her, but it was really just her. And I'm just thinking, wow, like that's it. That's the person who pretty much that's why, so that she could feel good about, making me feel bad. What? Like I just can't believe that. Sometimes I'm like, how does my entire life go down the toilet for one person that's not even like super cool? It just didn't make any sense to me. And it still doesn't today. I'm shocked that these people are in charge. I don't know who else is in charge, but they definitely shouldn't be in charge. Like I don't know what's going on. It's mind-boggling because I mean, if you've seen these people and what they look like and what they do, they don't even make that much money. But they are in control of my misery. Why? Why? I don't know. I don't understand why this is such a big deal, why they have to do it so badly. Why is this so important for them to do? Why can't they just follow the law? Because if they did follow the law, they wouldn't have any kids in foster care. Because they never follow the law. Ever. If they only took in abandoned children, they'd barely have any kids in foster care. They have to do it the way they're doing it, which is arbitrary and unlawfully. They were never supposed to take my kids ever. Like there was no law that said they could ever. And they did repeatedly. And she loved doing it. She enjoyed doing it. And she knew there was no law at all. She can read the law too. All these people that I was involved with in these state agencies, they all know what the law says, that the child has to be abandoned, but they still do it. It's because they enjoy doing it. And that's really sad because children are being hurt, and my son was hurt and my daughter was hurt. And I just don't get it. I don't get how they have been in power this long. I don't get how they have this much control. And I just don't see why they're so cool. I just really don't. And it's sad that I have to go through all this and nothing gets no justice for me at all. There never will be because they're in charge. I'll never get paid from this because they're in charge of the people who pay for it. So I have to do YouTube channels and stuff because otherwise I'm never going to get any money. If I do profit from it, it's going to be because I do it on my own, not because they pay me, because they don't ever do the right thing. That's never going to happen ever in life. And so after realizing that, yeah, I definitely had to make a YouTube channel because there's no other option. I didn't just go through all this for nothing. I have to make something out of it. I can't just, no, I'm sorry. No way, Jose. Not gonna happen. But basically, I never got my two oldest kids back. My son ended up going with his father. My daughter ended up getting adopted by complete strangers who took her to Texas, changed her name, and basically just disappeared after they got the adoption incentive bonus that pays them more than $10,000 the year that she's adopted, and then gives them like $2,000 a month until she's 21. So yeah, they took that money and left. Michelle Bullard, Greg Bullard, Elijah Bullard. Yes, they did. That's what they did. And no heart at all. They knew I was in full compliance with the court order. They knew I had another child with me, and they still took off with my oldest daughter and manipulated her into believing that she should be adopted. My son, on the other hand, he was abandoned by his father within 2 years of being taken into his custody, and Jamia waited for the entire dependency for him to get out of jail to give him custody of his son. And I think she knew that he was going to fail, but she just wanted to pretty much make me suffer, so she did this out of spite and anger towards me, and not for my son's safety or well-being, because she knew that he wasn't ready, and she knew that he would not succeed. But she still gave him custody, and so within 2 years he abandoned my son, and I took my son back in, and nobody cared at that time because he was 14 years old. So when CPS was contacted about it, basically saying, I basically, asked them, can I take my son in? Is that even legal? I mean, he was taken from me. My rights weren't terminated. He was given to his father, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed to take him back in. And so I did. And they didn't offer any help to him at all, even though he was technically in their custody, not mine. I took him in, and he stayed with me until he was 17, and then his father came back and told CPS to go get his son for him again. And every time that they took my children from their father, it was always like a voluntary placement. They would wait for him to voluntarily place the child, because they would not take any child from an African American man. They just refused to do it. They only allowed voluntary placement. So if he agreed to voluntary placement, then they would take the child, which means that voluntary placement is so easy because then you can get the child back within 30 days no matter what. And that's why they do it that way, because they want to give the child back to an African American man, but not to me. They would never, ever, ever give my child back to me. That was not an option ever. Okay, never. I barely got to keep the child I had at the time. But we did make it out, and it took a few years to get the case closed because of corruption, and because, the judges are corrupt, and so are the social workers. And so basically my daughter and I moved into a nice new apartment, and I did lose my job, but I started going to school after that, and I was trying to get my degree. And I did get very far, but I didn't quite graduate at that time. It would take a while for me to graduate. And I started getting harassed by them again, by the Bellevue CPS, and then again by the Kent CPS. And eventually they ended up taking my fourth daughter, and this would be like the, I don't know, 6th or 8th removal of my children. And it was for a dirty drug screen. But that was the second time they removed her, because they also removed her when she was 3 months old for when I lost my housing, which is similar to what happened to my son. It's crazy. But yeah, I lost my housing, and it was part of the case plan that I stay in the place that I was living at. And since I moved, they came to my drug treatment class and said that I needed to give them my newborn baby, and I did, because I thought I had to. And I should have just left and said no. But now that I think about it, they don't have any laws to do what they're doing anyway. I should have sued those police officers. I did file a lot of lawsuits, but not until much later. Basically, I